Good evening and welcome to this very special webinar, one of the top webinars that we do every year. We have some special guests, but before that, I am your Director of Communications. My name is Kevin Johannes, and I will be asking a few questions of you if you would be so kind as to answer them in our polls. But before we do that, I want to make sure that you understand you can ask us questions by putting your question typed in the question section or in the chat, which we will then ask our panelists at the last 30 minutes of our event this evening. If you have another question, there is a way to raise your hand, and if we can get to it, we will. This is being recorded and broadcast, and you may see it on our social media channels, and we ask that if you see it on our YouTube, our LinkedIn, our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, please like it and share with others. Our first question for the evening will come up now. You have 30 or so seconds. Please just take a quick poll for us, and we will continue to move on. Thank you for that. Answering that question, if you have a will, we will move on to our second question. If you indulge us a little further, here's a third question for you. And please answer our final question for our poll. It will give our panelists some information that it'll be very necessary. So I thank you for taking time out for that. At this point, I'm going to turn our webinar over to our executive director, Ms. Janice Matthews, who's not only our executive director, but also an attorney. So she knows a lot about this field, and she has brought in some very, as my grandmother would say, high cotton steppers that know a lot about this field as well, and she will get a chance to introduce them. Please take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Johannes. Those are some very interesting poll results. We take those polls so that we get a sense of who's in the audience with us and, try to gear our remarks to what you indicate in your answers. So thank you for answering those questions. Tonight, we're going to take a look at using estate planning and inheritance to build intergenerational wealth. One of the hottest topics being discussed today in public policy is the racial wealth gap and what we can do to make that gap less, or at least to keep it from growing and to make it less a factor in our lives. The purpose of this webinar is to explain just a few basic principles associated with estate planning, wills, probate. We don't expect you to become experts tonight, and we don't expect you to take our advice. This is for informational purposes only, but when it comes time to create your own personal estate plan, there is no substitute for your own lawyer, someone who has experience in probate and estates, and your own financial advisor or accountant. We hope that you will become more aware this evening of the connection between having an estate plan and building intergenerational wealth, because one of the main sources of intergenerational wealth is that wealth, that property, those assets that we inherit from our ancestors. We'll explore some of the considerations that are necessary, and we expect that you will become familiar with some of the basic concepts and terminology, including things like a will, a trust, a power of attorney, and heir property. And by the time the evening is over, we hope you'll understand how important estate planning is to effective property ownership. But before we get into the details, this is about intergenerational wealth. And what we know is a simple definition. Wealth is the difference between what a family owns, their home, their savings, their checking, their 401k, their automobiles, and what they owe. So what we're really talking about is your net worth. A simple equation: property value of property of every kind. Take away debt equals wealth. So I want to tell you just a little bit about what that wealth gap looks like now. Let's see. Are you seeing the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay. In 2019, there was a huge gap between what Black folk owned and what they owe. And the median wealth of Black households was $24,100. If you compare that to what a typical white family owned, it was closer to $200,000. The typical Black household had only 12.7% of the wealth in value of property, net assets of a typical white household, which left us with $165,000 deficit in comparison to the typical white household. What I'd like to do now, we do have some very special guests with us this evening, and I want to stop sharing my screen at this point and introduce our guest, who is Ms. Kimberly Ross. She is Senior Vice President having a little technical difficulty. Here we go. Ms. Ross is Senior Vice President for Federal Relations of the American Council of Life Insurers, ACLI. Ms. Ross oversees federal advocacy on financial services, tax, retirement, income security, and diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. She joined ACLI in December 2020 with 2 decades of experience in lead staff positions in the United States House of Representatives and the Senate. Most recently, she served as Chief of Staff and Chief Counsel to current Black Caucus Chair, Congresswoman Joyce Beatty from Ohio. On the Hill, Ms. Ross focused on housing, insurance, banking, and diversity, equity, and inclusion issues under the jurisdiction of the House Financial Services Committee. She previously served as staff director and counsel for the House Committee on Veterans Affairs, Disability Assistance, and Memorial Affairs Subcommittee, where she worked on helping to reform the VA's disability claims process and the provision of insurance coverage for veterans, their families, and survivors. She also previously served as legislative director and counsel for the late Representative Elijah Cummings and senior legislative assistant to Senator Barbara Mikulski, where she began her Hill career working on the No Child Left Behind Act, a truly seminal piece of legislation. Prior to coming to the Hill, Ms. Ross was a regulatory attorney working for the Maryland Public Service Commission and also for Sprint. She earned a law degree from the University of Maryland, Carey School of Law, where she is now a member of the Board of Visitors. She earned her undergraduate degree from Notre Dame University of Maryland. She also holds a certificate in organizational management from the Johns Hopkins Carey School of Business. She is admitted to the State Bar of Maryland and is a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated and lives with her husband in Annapolis, Maryland. Thank you, Ms. Ross, for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Ms. Janice, for that wonderful and flattering introduction. It sounds like a lot when you read it like that, so I really appreciate you taking the time. I'm so happy and I feel so privileged to join you in the National Council of Negro Women and your esteemed audience tonight to talk about this, as you mentioned, very topical subject that is top of mind, particularly as we are continue to be in the midst of this global pandemic. We know that the Black community, we've sort of faced three pandemics during this time. The pandemic wreaked havoc on the Black community, and we didn't just have a health pandemic, we had a social justice and a financial pandemic. As far as the wealth gap goes, we know that the wealth gap widened during the pandemic. The wealth gap that currently, as those figures that you stated and showed to everyone, those figures where we were at 228 years, that time is now increasing that it would take to close the wealth gap. So we know we can't overcome those 400 years that we have been behind in the systemic systems that have been in place to keep us behind, but we know that there are things that we can do to put us in a better place moving forward and to put things in place for the next generation and generations yet unborn. A few other points I want to make before introducing our next esteemed guests and panelists is that the wealth gap also widens as people get older, meaning that if you start young, you can figure out ways to close it. We know that the other interesting point that I found when I was doing research on this is that Black people actually don't have more debt than white people. We just have fewer assets. So the focus is on building assets, which we do a lot of, but we also often don't focus on the transfer of those assets. One of the other largest portions of wealth transfer, other than real estate, and we know that ownership of property is the largest portion of the wealth gap. And in fact, the rate of Black home ownership has not changed since the passage of the Fair Housing Act in 1968. But one of the largest portions of wealth transfer, other than through property, is inheritance and other monetary gifts, death benefits, and of course, insurance benefits. And finally, I know it seems, common sense, but it goes to just saying, you've heard it before, wealth leads to more wealth. So if you start with a wealth building mindset and continue in that vein. Eventually, you'll get there, and so will your heirs and heirs from when you are and leave your legacy. So with that, I'd like to introduce Amy Griffin, our next esteemed panelist. Apologies. As you indicated, Amy is also an attorney. She is the founder and president of the Association of Black Estate Planning Professionals, Incorporated, an organization committed to bridging the racial wealth gap through collaboration and capacity building of financial professionals and economic education She is the principal of the Griffin firm, serving Washington, D.C., Maryland, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Massachusetts. With core values of faith, excellence, relationships, service, and trustworthiness, the Griffin firm is committed to supporting the creation, protection, and transfer of wealth through estate and business planning. Amy also serves on a number of boards, including the U.S. Black Chamber, National African American Insurance Association Foundation, as well as the Commission on Social Action and Legal Ministry for Kingdom Fellowship AME Church. Amy is committed to supporting community growth through education and speaks regularly in national, regional, and local forums to educate other attorneys in the community. Amy is also a monthly contributor to the Washington Informer. She strongly believes that when we know better, we can do better. Thank you, Amy. I also want to issue a disclaimer for all of us on the call who are attorneys that we are not dispensing any legal advice. This information is for you to receive it, act on it, do your own research, engage with another professional, and hopefully it will move you to action. But we have to issue that disclaimer because we are attorneys and we can't be held liable for anything that we have said and upon which you might act. But Amy, without further ado, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, the trio of lawyers. But we're fun anyway, irrespective of the JD. So I wanted to briefly ask if we can put up the PowerPoint, with this brief PowerPoint that we're going to share. Thanks very much. Well, I want to start off with just by having a conversation of really what is estate planning. We had a poll earlier that said 30% of folks had a will. But when we think about estate planning, so often we just get bogged down with what is it? It's not me. I ain't got an estate. But estate planning answers three questions. First and foremost is what happens when you die. Sometimes I have people say to me, I don't really care because I'll be dead, so it doesn't really matter. But we do care because we think about the people that we love, who come before us, who come after us. Be thinking about those relationships we have. The second question about estate planning is what happens if you can't take care of yourself? Because if you can't make decisions for yourself, someone's got to do it for you. So that's one of the questions that we answer when we have comprehensive estate planning. But the powerful piece of estate planning is what's going to be your legacy. How will the people that you love that come behind you be impacted because that you lived your life? So I encourage people to be thinking about taking the power to say, what is the legacy that I want to leave? What we know, what we say at our firm is that we're building strong communities, one family at a time. The next slide, please. So when we think about estate planning, we asked people here earlier, how many people have a will? And I say to folks, if you don't write a will for yourself, the great state of Maryland, the Commonwealth of Virginia, the District of Columbia has got you covered. They will write a will for you, and they will build it on the formula based on what they believe a typical family looks like. Now, and so why that matters, why it really matters is because most of us don't have typical families. Most of us have a husband. Many of us have a boo, but not necessarily a spouse. And we have children that we adopt without legally adopting. So we need to be thinking about if that formula applies to us or not. And that has an impact on the people that we care about, the people that we love, and the people we want to leave something behind for. But also knowing that, what is the impact of that which we have, because I had the unfortunate opportunity of working with a family who didn't have an estate plan. They had one house, 3 kids, and they wanted to divide it in 3. So the house got lost. One of the biggest scams that I talk about all the time of the probate process is you got to pay the state based on how much money you have, how much assets you've left for your loved ones. The more you have, the more you pay. So if you have $1 million, you pay more than if you have $150,000. If that's not the greatest scam ever, you've got me. But we can choose to avoid that, because that's one of the ways in which we are able to preserve some of the assets for our loved ones. If we avoid the probate process, we can be thoughtful about how do we strategically give our loved ones that which we have had. Now, let me just talk to you a little bit more, and I'm going to use Maryland as an example of what the probate process looks like. First and foremost, on TV, we have this image of the reading of the will. We have people going into the lawyer's office for the reading of the will. And I say that's truly just good TV. Or maybe not good TV, it's just TV. Because people call me for a reading of the will, and I say my reading and your reading doesn't make a difference. I will indeed read it for you, but that doesn't have any power. Those papers do not have power because you have been read to from a lawyer. The probate process is indeed directed by the court. So again, I will walk you through the probate process in Maryland. And Maryland is specific because it has an inheritance tax. So they need to have greater detail than in some of the other states that do not. But first and foremost, what the process is, when you walk with the will, then you create a petition. You go to the court and said, Amy died, and I want to become her personal representative. The first thing that they do is put legal notice in the paper that says, Amy died. Creditors, did she owe you any money? And so creditors get to claim their money first. Let's say the Sears and Roebuck, the American Express card, the hospital bill that has been left afterwards, they get to come first. And then after you've given a list to the court to all the assets that you have, so that they can determine in Maryland if indeed there is an inheritance tax, then those assets can be distributed to your loved ones after receiving your letters of administration. So realizing that there's about at least 3 months before you're going to even be able to move anything. We've had, unfortunately, people go through the to the foreclosure because they're unable to pay the mortgage. So we encourage people to be thinking about what is the best way to, one, minimize the probate costs because that's taken from your family, and 2, avoid it altogether. So let's go to the next slide. So the 3 base foundational documents that everybody should have at the age of, I said 18, right? 18, because that's when you're really an adult. And what we've learned the hard way is sometimes, you know, we all want to live to be 97 years old, but sometimes we don't make it. So we also know that we need help. And our rights to privacy are pretty significant once we turn 18. When my children went to college, I realized that I can't be involved with supporting them if I don't have these documents in place. The first document that everybody should have is a durable power of attorney. That is a document that gives somebody capacity to act on your behalf for financial matters. It can be as broad or as specific as you choose it to be. But even though we think that sometimes our spouse should have the authority, they do not. We think that your parents should have the authority, they do not. Without a durable power of attorney giving express specific information, specific authority to act on your behalf for financial matters, you don't have that approval. And then that power of attorney is valid up until the date of death or until you make a change, right? You can decide that, okay, you know, I used to like that person, but I don't like him anymore, so I'm going to make the change. Then there is the healthcare packet. The healthcare packet empowers somebody to act on your behalf for health decisions. But first and foremost, what we need to know is that there, you know, when you go to the doctor, there is the most significant HIPAA, right? The rights of privacy regarding your health information. You want to decide who do you want to have that information? Who do you want to be able to look at your medical records, talk to your healthcare providers? But most importantly, what you really want to know is what you want to provide is if I can't speak for myself, what I would want to have, decisions I would want to be made, these are the guidelines. For example, how long would I want to be on a ventilator? For example, if I am in a persistent vegetative state, then who will I want to have be fed by a tube? We get to make those decisions for ourselves. Unfortunately, I have had siblings call me and say, I'm not speaking to my sister or my brother because she killed my mom. And that's because she decided that they're not going to maintain life-sustaining treatment. We need to be thinking about how do we protect those people through the grief and grief process to make sure that we are indeed providing for the ones that we care about the way that we care about. We also encourage people to identify what does the end of celebration look like for them, right? And we incorporate that in such a way so that's a part of the healthcare packet as well as the last will and testament, so that we can determine, you know, what is it that you want. I've had, again, a mom call and say she wanted to sue her son-in-law because she, as she put it, burned up her baby, cremated her. Again, greed and grief are two G's that really emotionally we need to manage accordingly. And then the last will and testament, again, it directs the probate process. But one of the things that I always encourage those people to be thinking about if they have minor children, identify that standby guardian. Who do you want to be guardian for your children if you are not here to do it? We do not want our children to be caught up in the system. We don't want them in foster care because someone has not gone through the process to be covered. What we know is that, unfortunately, if we don't have that person in place, the government isn't going to take the liability to say, oh, yes, you can go with Uncle Jimmy because Uncle Jimmy may be that creepy Uncle Jimmy who is responsible. The last will and testament, as I said before, directs the probate process. It is not the end all be all. It is a governmental process that is direct, a governmental process. It's a lawsuit that's directed through the courts. So if indeed, you know, you see on TV what you need to have happen, what you want to have happen, the distributions, how you want to make, don't believe it. Know that the court requires that it goes through the court judicial process in order to determine who gets what, where, when, and how. So I encourage people to be thinking about how can we strategically avoid the probate process. And so let's go to that next slide. So one of the ways that we can avoid the probate process is easily setting up beneficiaries on all of your accounts. What we know is that if you can avoid probate, you can avoid probate by having beneficiaries on your bank accounts, your life insurance policies, your IRAs, all of those financial instruments. If you have a beneficiary, avoids the probate process. The probate process is only required for those things that are solely in your name. If it is solely in your name, such as a car or a house, but we can avoid a probate process for a house and with a transfer on death deed for some states. Now, one of the things we do need to know is that probate is different for different states. There are different rules. The laws of intestacy means the law that it happens when you don't have a will is different for each state, and the formulas are slightly different. So we encourage people to be thoughtful and talk to a professional in your state about what can happen. So the transfer on death deed avoids probate, and it means that I will continue to own my house during my lifetime, but when I pass away, it goes to whomever I choose it to go to. Now, what I am thoughtful about is I want to make sure that my children get the benefit of my house, or if I blended married, I can say that I wanted to go to my husband for his lifetime and then to my children. But we get to be thoughtful about how to make that happen. And then there is an enhanced life estate deed. One of the things that we need to be also mindful of is if there is a need for long-term care. If there's a need for long-term care, such as Medicaid because of a nursing home, or even indeed that they're getting support in the house that is paid by Medicaid, we need to know that not just only is eligibility an issue, getting eligible by having converted your assets or protected your assets accordingly. But what we also know is that after a person has received Medicaid or long-term care Medicaid, then the state can indeed put a lien on your property so that is required to be sold. But if indeed you have a certain kind of enhanced life estate deed that has transferred the property 5 years prior, or sometimes 2 years prior if you have the exclusion, then that avoids the lien. It avoids the recovery process. So I encourage people, again, to speak to that professional to enable you to protect your assets irrespective of where, of the fact that you need long-term care. The next slide, please. I know that I'm going fast, I'm covering a lot, but I know that we don't have a little bit of time and really want to make sure that there are time for questions. One of the other ways that we are thoughtful about, and we don't know much as in our community about how do we protect ourselves and plan for the future. One of the things that Janice said earlier is that we need to be thinking about not just our generation, not just our kids, but our kids' kids. That's truly how we define wealth. When we think about long-term strategic planning for wealth creation, we get to plan accordingly. Like so one of the things that we don't typically tend to use is a trust. Although typically statistics say 30% have a will, it's not typically a strategic plan. But if we have if we are thoughtful, there are two major categories of trust. The first category of trust is a revocable or revocable living trust, which the name says that it's revocable. You can make changes every other day if you choose to. And then the irrevocable is more of an asset protection trust. But we're going to talk first and foremost about the legacy building trust of the revocable living trust. We get to put all of your assets together. It avoids the probate process, which is a public process. Everybody gets to know what's in your will, who everybody went to. If your assets are in a trust, it is private. Nobody has the authority to read the trust, get access to the trust, and it's not published on anybody's website. But the best thing about a trust is that it creates rules, and it creates rules on an assignment for your money, right? So if indeed you have, let's say, for example, even something as strategic as your house. If you have one house and 2 children, you could put your house in the trust, and if people if neither of the children choose to live there, it can become an income-producing property, and both of your children can benefit. Not only your children, but your grandchildren can benefit. One of the things that I encourage people to do is get $1 million life insurance policy for their grandchildren from the moment that grandchild is born. And I'm just going to use $1 million for an example, because you get as much as you can afford. But a whole life policy, we spend a lot of times buying assets that depreciate. But if we got a whole life policy for our grandchildren when they're born, because we do it when they're born, because that's the cheapest it will ever be. The older you get, the more expensive it is. But let's say we put a $1 million life insurance policy in the trust. When they got to college, they were able to borrow from that life insurance policy for college, right? And one of the things I will tell you, I'm controlling. So I am thoughtful about giving it to them per semester based on their semester achievement. We incentivize graduating early. But in addition, if we also put supplements in there, if they are unable to be successful, then we can stop the money. But we are planning for their success. We are working for their success. Sometimes we just need to put a tutor in there. We can put all those opportunities for success in that trust. But then we also give them the down payment for a house. Many of our trusts that I work with, we are able to fund a purchase of a house, but we want our children to become community contributors. So in addition, we may fund it, but they still have to pay for it. And it's still that they can build credit, as well as we can make sure that they are, are able to create leverage opportunities for the assets. If I could think about the time that I didn't need to have to save the money to have a down payment for the house, I would have been in that house so much earlier. As Kimberly said earlier, when we are the earliest, the youngest that we are is when the gap is the smallest. But if we could keep the pace up, that we could able to build up our wealth by creating for them an opportunity to buy a house and supporting it, and then and then they could conceptually stop paying that mortgage because they would have paid it off. These are the ways in which that we can build wealth. And then not to mention, when our assets are in a irrevocable trust, let's say our grandchild has that irrevocable trust or that life insurance policy in that irrevocable trust, when they apply for financial aid or fill out that FAFSA form, it does not show up on there because it's in our irrevocable trust. So we need to be thinking about what is the best, most strategic way to plan for our for the multiple generations, not just for us, not just for the next day, or the next generation, but for our children's children. That way we can truly indeed build wealth. So our revocable living trust is about legacy building, and our irrevocable living trust is about asset protection, because one of the distinctions are that revocable trust uses my social security number as an identifier. The irrevocable living trust is like a limited liability company, and it does not, it uses an EIN, and it's a separate entity totally. And so if indeed someone were to sue you, they wouldn't have access to your personal assets. So that's one of the ways in which we protect our assets for the future. And then the other piece that I always want people to be mindful is, if you are a business owner, you too need to be thoughtful about the estate plan for it. Now, there are, the Griffin firm, we talk about the 5 Ds of business succession planning: death, disability, divorce, departure, and dissolution. As we think about those 5 things, then we're able to position our businesses so that they are indeed successful, beneficial for our next generation and our loved ones. We can position our businesses, not that they would have to be dissolved, but that we can strategically build for that next generation, and they can we can be thoughtful about how do we strategically build. Sometimes it's not just that we want to sell our business or that we want to close, but we want it to continue on beyond us and have our family members, our loved ones, receive the revenue, but not necessarily operate. But we have to be strategic and thoughtful about so doing, by having that key man insurance, by having that strategic plan ahead of time. Because if we don't have a plan, their default is that in 9 months that business needs to be wound down and then and just dissolved. But we are building for the future if we are thoughtful about intergenerational wealth. Next one, please. Next slide. Okay, so in sort of the conclusion, a lot of times I always try to end with, what is the difference between a living trust and a will? A living trust is a trust that's created during your lifetime, and the purpose is to avoid probate, right? Because then you can have privacy, because the information that's in your trust is private. What's in the will is public. Anybody, anywhere, after you've passed away, can go down to the Register of Wills and read your will. Know who you've got. You will see realtors all of the time at the Register of Wills reading the petitions of the probate process, and therefore will reach out to the heirs to say, we want to buy your house. And so people, what I've experienced is, unfortunately, far too often, that loved one, not with having the presence of mind or having the strategic thought, having the opportunity, is sells the property and it's lost. One of the other things that happens when you go through the probate process, oftentimes, if you have one house and you have multiple kids, if you have 3 kids in one house, each kid getting a third of the house, oftentimes that property is had to be sold in order for each person to get the benefit. So I encourage people to be very thoughtful about how do we strategically plan to make sure that our assets appreciate, not evaporate. What we also know with the wills, everything is distributed right away. So it's a lot like an inheritance in many ways. And so what we know, lottery winners are like an inheritance, is like an inheritance. And then lottery winners are 4 times more apt to file bankruptcy because there isn't a strategic plan, there isn't methodology. And so what happens is the money is lost. So we encourage people to make sure that they that they put their assets with a strategic plan in a living trust. One of the other things that we need to be thoughtful about is, if indeed you have a loved one, a family member who has a disability and or has a disability and has benefits received by the government that's based on or limited by their income, right, or their assets. If indeed they received something as minor as maybe $3,000, they could lose their governmental benefits. So therefore, you need to potentially create a special needs trust to protect those assets. And that is one of the kinds of irrevocable trust that allows your loved ones to continue to have access to the assets by quality of life, but protects their benefits for the government. So we encourage people to be thoughtful about how do we strategically build, right? So a living trust is not just for the super wealthy, and that's so often what we believe a trust fund baby is, that super wealthy person. But indeed, it's for anybody who wants to create a legacy that goes beyond themselves. So I encourage people to be thoughtful about it, and then build out the plan and the strategy, not just for your kids, but your kids' kids. How do we want to sometimes protect our assets to stay within our bloodline so that we can strategically build for the future? I think that's all that I have for you today, but we will go to, I think Kimberly is going to, we do questions next, I think.
That's
Yes,
right.
I think we will take questions. I think Janice is joining us.
Yes, if you have questions, you can put your questions either in the chat, or you can type them in the chat, or there is a feature that you can raise your hand and we'll recognize you for your question, or I believe there's a Q&A function as well. So are there,
Yes,
Mr. do we have any questions?
yes, there are several questions in the Q&A area now. The first one is the foundation estate planning document limited to a specific state or state of filing?
So the great thing about once you've created a valid foundational, all three of those documents, and you move, wherever you move to is fine, as long as they were valid to the place that you created them. So you don't have to get new ones every time you move. But with that being said, you still need to review them regularly. One of the things that we are mindful about is that sometimes we encourage people, we have a planiversary where you reach out to people annually to say, do you still like the people you like? Do you still have the stuff that you have? Because what we know is so often we forget to update them. Right. As our relationships change in life, we need to be thinking about does it still fit? Did we have an additional child? Do we have grandchildren? Are we still married to the person that we were married to when we wrote it? Right. So being thoughtful about how do we make those changes.
Does a TOD avoid taxation in the same way the living trust does?
Say that again. I missed that.
I'm sorry, does a TOD avoid taxation in the same way a living trust does?
So I don't try to say avoid taxation. The transfer on death deed, one of the great things about that is you get the step up in tax bases. I think that's what we're talking about. One of the things that we are mindful about is, unfortunately, sometimes we have people who put their children's name on their deed. And when they do that, that creates a potential for capital gains tax. And so the transfer on death deed, if this is what the purpose of the question was, if the transfer on death deed creates the opportunity for a step up in tax bases, that yes, it does.
Okay, next question is, I'm thinking ahead in conjunction with preparing my will. What is involved in planning for senior care insurance so I won't have to be committed to a nursing home?
So long-term care insurance, I think actually, Kimberly, this is your bailiwick, right? Do you want to go there?
Ms. Ross?
Sorry, there I am. Okay, sorry, I'm trying to unmute myself. Would you mind repeating the question again?
I think the question was about how do you or trying to avoid the nursing home, wanting to make sure that there is long-term care support. What do you I think that was right.
Yes.
I mean, if you're trying to avoid I don't know about if they're one and the same in terms of trying to avoid the nursing home, but I can tell you that preparing to have long-term care will help you to live independently as long as you need to, because it will allow you to decide how you receive care versus being forced to accept care in a way that you didn't plan for. And that does require planning. As Amy has said, long-term care is a part of the, those 5 Ds that she talked about, as well as disability insurance, as well as long-term care insurance. It's never too late to get long-term care insurance. And, the majority of people think that it's too expensive, but the average long-term care stay is somewhere between $500,000 and $800,000. So when you think about it, yeah, you do need to have it. You would just have to not have 2 disabilities, so to speak, where you can't perform daily functions, and your long-term care policy would be applicable. Again, it's all a part of a package. It's not things that you do individually. It's a part of the whole planning strategy of protecting yourself, your assets. You are your most valuable asset, and having long-term care is a part of it, and certainly makes it less of a burden on your family, so that you can pass along some of your wealth and protect the wealth that you do have by having that coverage.
And I'm not an insurance professional, so
right. Neither am I, by the way.
Right. So, but part of the
conversation.
So it being thoughtful, but there is also sometimes you can get a rider on your life insurance that has a long-term care, so that you're not. So it helps minimize it in some ways. So, but that's the conversation to have with the professionals. That's why I encourage people to make sure that you have a professional, a conversation with an advisor, a trusted advisor.
Absolutely. That the riders are becoming a lot more popular because some people shy away from having just a singular long-term care policy for whatever reason. But it's all a part of planning and budgeting and knowing what your current wealth is allowing you to have for your future wealth, quite frankly.
Here's an interesting question. Why not establish an investment account instead of a whole life insurance policy? Wouldn't the money in the investment account grow faster than the life insurance policy?
So again, I'm not a financial professional, but one of the things that we do know is that it may or that may not, right? And so, and I also don't think of it as an or, right? It's an and. It can be an and thing, because I always encourage people to also to incentivize investing and savings for your loved ones. And so it's not an and or. It's not an and or, it's an and. But we can definitely count on the fact that we're going to indeed go into the next generation, right?
The other thing too, and it's funny, quite frankly, I joined the ACLI about 18 months ago, and I recently purchased a long-term care policy, and that was some of the questions that I asked. And the stock market was doing really well not too long ago, right? But now it's not. And so when you're talking about providing for your how you age gracefully and how you're able to live independently for as long as you need to in a way that you feel provides you dignity, sometimes you can't invest that's not something the stock market can ensure, right? You have to have other vehicles. So like Amy is saying, it's not an either or, it's an and. It's all a part of putting together a full-throated strategy that invests in you, your heirs, and your heirs yet unborn.
Many people have asked for the 5 Ds again, but I will say also, if you check in the handouts, there's a handout based upon what was said earlier, but if you ladies like to, just run the D's again for them.
Death, disability, divorce, departure, and dissolution.
Someone
Those are the
asked, do
5
you
D's
practice?
for business succession planning.
Someone asked, do you practice in New York?
I do not, but we have great colleagues who do. That was one of the reasons why we created the Association of Black Estate Planning Professionals, to build the network so that, because we know that the truth of the matter is everybody doesn't care about us and the cultural competence, right? So I do have a wonderful colleague in New York that I would be glad to share. I have a few.
Who do you recommend in assisting me in setting up a living trust?
An amazing attorney.
Easy question, easy question.
And so, but let me speak to that a little bit, though, as I was being a little bit glib. But when I say that, I am very thoughtful about the fact that all attorneys don't know estate planning. Like if you have a bad foot, you don't go to a cardiologist. So make sure that when you go to an estate planning attorney, that it's indeed an estate planning attorney. And it's not a solo person that says, I do estate planning, divorce, commercial litigation, bankruptcy, personal injury, right? So being mindful of those folks, I was, and granted, I'm biased. I was like, our URL for our website is yourestateplanningатtorney.com because that's what we do. That's who we are. But it is the practice, because we get better with time. But if you can only do it once in a while, you're only going to have that once in a while thoughtfulness, right? And so I encourage people to make sure that when you are doing that outreach, finding someone that you, one, are comfortable with, because it's a personal, intimate relationship. I want you to be able to tell me about that extra child that's over there, right? That extra family that's over there. But being mindful of that, check it out to make sure that you have a good relationship, that you care, and make sure that you have a conversation where they're listening to what your values are.
Amy, I loved your comment about the planiversary. That's something that only an estate attorney would be able to say to you, because, and again, I am not an estate attorney. I would go to someone like Amy. You know, you have to go to the people who know best how to advise you on how to plan for this. This is your entire, you know, you're working for a purpose, you know, being intentional about what you want your legacy to be, and transferring intergenerational wealth is not a pie in the sky idea. What Amy is saying is that it's literally for everyone on the phone. If this is not what you've done, including the speakers, you know, we all have affairs in our lives where we can get them better in order, and this is an opportunity to put that in focus and intention on that.
One of the things that, again, people who struggle with the fact that, okay, I haven't saved a whole bunch of money, during my lifetime, but that's why insurance policies are pretty significant. And I don't want to be glib, but to say that even if you haven't saved, you can buy that insurance policy and put it in a trust so that there's something left. And I'm not trying to say the death policies, because that is so often people will say to us, oh yeah, I have a death policy, and so when I can be buried. No, we want to leave an inheritance, right? Our lives are and our children and our children's children are much more significant than that. So let's be mindful and thoughtful about not just cheapening ourselves with that.
And to that point, Amy, we know, and it's been, you know, proven empirically, and it goes against, you know, common thinking. You would think that the wealthy, because they have more wealth, they wouldn't want as much insurance, but actually the least wealthy families have the least insurance coverage. And when we know that they stand to benefit from it the most. So, and this is a part of how the wealth gap continues to widen, because if you don't have anything to transfer other than a burial benefit, at when you know your time is, we're all going out, right, at some point in time, the point is to plan for it and leave something that is your legacy. You may not be able to reap the benefits, but there will be many who do, and the community actually benefits from it, because one of the toughest things for the Black community to do, for those of us who achieve what we call the middle class, is to pass that same level of middle class living and lifestyle along to our heirs. For whatever reason, whether it be in business, whether it be personally, the next generation that comes behind us generally are not doing as well as we are, and this is why this planning is so significant.
Our next question, and actually it's in several different questions, is what is the timeline for processing a living will? And also, what is the expense area around setting up a living trust? How much does it cost?
So again, it's one of those things where every lawyer will answer, it depends, right? And so I will say to you that it's thousands of dollars. Unequivocally, it's probably, and I'm speaking from my world, and I'm sure, again, there are, I am not an advocate on the DIYs on the online stuff, right? The Susie Ormans, because you're not getting counsel, you're not getting advice. But it's typically, I would suggest to you, it's around the $5,000 mark and up.
Are there special, who helps veterans and special needs people set up living trust is the question.
So absolutely, 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 absolutely. Because again, you get to protect your assets, right? And if you're going to get benefits from the government, you need to be able to qualify for that. And so the supplemental needs trust is one in which that you can still have the benefit of those dollars without registering that they're yours. Because for Medicaid or anything like that, Social Security disability, if you have more than $2,500, you lose it, right? And if you're a veteran, they have aids and attendance benefits, but you can't have more than about $80,000 in countable assets. So that's why I encourage people, if you put it in an irrevocable trust, it converts it from a countable asset to a non-countable asset.
If you have a mortgage on your home or property, can it be still placed in a trust?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There was a Scar and St. Germain Act that allowed that to happen. And so you can put it on there and they cannot call the mortgage.
You wouldn't know what insurance companies allow you to put $1 million on your baby.
Well, I will say that many do, but the key is that the parent has to have $1 million also. You can't have more than your child can have more than you, but you can have term insurance. So it's more expensive for you than it is for the baby because you're old, but but it can be term.
This, pardon me. Please tell us more about a living trust transferring the house to a beneficiary. If you place the house in a trust, are you exempt from probate or inheritance tax?
So if you place the house in a trust, you are indeed exempt from probate, the whole probate process. Now that in essence the trust owns it, and so you are able to put instructions on the trust as to who gets it, where, when, why, and how. And the house can be retained in the trust. One of the things that we often I see often is that when a house goes through the probate process, and if that's the only asset in the estate, then it is sold. It needs to be sold to pay for any creditors. But if the house is in the trust and there are no assets outside of the trust, you avoid probate completely. And not that I'm going to say to you that you shouldn't pay your debts, but there are some debts that you are no longer legally required to pay. And so your assets can stay nice, tucked away inside the trust. The second part about that is a revocable trust is an extension of you. And so once you put your assets in a trust, if your assets exceed the estate tax exemption level, upon passing, there is indeed estate taxes. However, if you're transferring your assets into an irrevocable trust, it's a gift that because again, it's no longer yours. It becomes part of that separate entity. And so it's a gift exemption. And so you have about $11 million in that lifetime gift exemption. But there's no estate tax when you pass away.
What is the best route for someone who already has a disability?
What is the best route? I don't quite understand.
Irrevocable or revocable?
So it depends on the assets. So typically, again, if we're trying to make sure that our benefits are not impacted, indeed, a supplemental needs trust, which is an irrevocable trust, is definitely the way to go. But again, but I want you to remember that Kimberly said this is not legal advice. All facts are different, and so I'm going sort of on the general, but not specific, because I don't know the facts to your circumstances situation.
Do you need a trust if you have already put your beneficiary on your bank account, house, IRA, etc.?
So let me just, I am a professional pessimist. Let me just say for the record, I'm a professional pessimist. So again, you can conceptually, there are times when you don't need a trust. I will say that absolutely. That if you want to give your assets completely away by the beneficiaries and there's no rules, there's no strategy, and it's just like, here you go, like lottery winnings, that's absolutely fine. However, I say all the time, people never call me to say, besides my family, that the only, they never call me to say I'm having the best day ever. They call our office to say there's a problem. So for example, if you've given all of your assets out in a beneficiary, who's going to pay for the funeral? Because you've given all the assets away. Nobody is responsible anymore, right? And so if your assets are in trust, they say, okay, handle all this stuff first and then give the money away. Because I will say to you honestly that we have a litigation matter when there's a brother who said, oh no, I got the insurance money, that's mine. I am not contributing to dad's funeral at all. So the sister paid for it and now she's suing him to get that money back. So, and the same thing has happened. I've had moms who put their children's name on their bank accounts, and so with the expectation that they will share it with their loved ones. I'll never forget the family that came into my office. There were two siblings who were on the bank accounts, and the other siblings showed up, and the siblings that were named on the accounts said, "We'll just call in. We're not going to show up." And they said, "No. Once somebody is jointly owned, once we receive it, I don't have to give it to anybody I want to." So that's the unfortunate. The unfortunate happens when I say greed and grief, right? So it's a plan accordingly.
Can IRAs and annuities be put into a trust as well?
So IRAs cannot, because that creates a taxable event, right? Because it's an individual retirement account. But what you can do is make the trust the beneficiary. So for me, like my life insurance, I own my life insurance, but my trust is the beneficiary, so that the money that's paid out is directed according to the rules of the trust.
My daughter is 18 and I should have already started. How do I catch up?
You need a good financial advisor, right, who will help you continue to develop your financial plan. And when I created the Association of Black Estate Planning Professionals, it was to create this collaborative approach, because like I said, I can write the best estate plan ever, but if you have $47.50, it's not that powerful a plan. So that's why there is a strategy where we come together collectively to build wealth for the multiple generations, right? And what I know is that with those banks that have high net worth clients, they create what we call a family office, where they have a full team of folks that work around folks, which is what we're doing too. Is that you need a team. We each deserve a counsel to manage your assets for you, with you.
The best thing is to do is, you can't change what you haven't done, is to get started and start today as soon as possible and commit to whatever it is that the financial advisor advises you to do.
And then protect the assets that you have. So examples, you can leave her that house, right?
Right. If it works for you, if they devise a plan for you and it works for you, then commit to it. And as they say, the beauty of compound interest, the beauty of the slow and steady winning the race. One of my favorite emblems is by John Rogers, who is the CEO, co-CEO of Arrow Investment, and he has the tortoise on there. Slow and steady wins the race. That has been shown time and time again. Being intentional, being slow and purposeful, and having a plan.
Can you have both a revocable and an irrevocable trust simultaneously?
Absolutely. And we have people who do that. One, because they have access to some things that they want to have, their primary residence in their revocable trust, but then they have those volatile things like your limited liability company that's in the irrevocable trust, so that we can make sure that it's an asset protection trust, being very thoughtful about that. And then for those people who have assets that exceed the estate tax limit, then we have both as well.
Several people are asking if your firm is accepting new clients.
Yes, we are.
And at this point, we're going to have one last question because of time. Are there financial advisors that work hand in hand with estate planning attorneys?
Absolutely, absolutely. We typically like that. That's part of, again, it's about a partnership. We really need to, as a community, I say we're better together. So if we can be thoughtful about how do we work together to make sure that we have a team of support for each person. It's like everybody should have their own lawyer, accountant, real estate person, financial advisor, insurance professional. All of those things should come together for your best interest. And they should be able to talk to one another in a really strategic way.
And I know it sounds like a lot when you say that, Amy, to have a team of professionals working for you, but figure out the strategy that's going to work for you. Sometimes it's you can work on commission, have folks work on commission, and they can advise you that way. But as many will tell you, and I've heard it throughout my life, sometimes you can be penny wise and dollar foolish, because one of the worst things you can do is to not have a plan, and to undervalue the work that you have committed and been doing all of your life to. So make it worthwhile, make it meaningful, make a plan, get with a financial advisor, estate planner, an attorney, and get that planiversary nailed down on a calendar, so that every year you're reassessing what you need. And at some point you get to the point where you may have a level of comfortability, and you've set it up and you've managed it, and it's sort of on autopilot. And Amy, I'd love for you to speak to that, of how this isn't something that you have to do all the time. You just have to be intentional about it. It's not like this ongoing struggle, but it does require you to put in the work in the beginning.
One of the things that I guess I encourage people to be thinking about, if we're thinking about not just sort of our death, but our life, right? What is the strategic plan for it? And then building it accordingly. So that if we think about, again, our legacy, it's not just about this one answer. It is about the life that we want to see for us, for our children, our grandchildren. And so as we continue to build on that and be thoughtful about that, it is a dynamic experience, and it's a powerful experience. Because it is, unfortunately, we shy away from this conversation too much. And therefore, as a community, we lose out. Where I think that so often we have this sort of survival mentality as opposed to the thriving approach. And then if we're looking at this like as an opportunity as opposed to something we're running from, it will change the whole way, the whole attitude and the opportunity that which we build on.
Occasionally,
I think
occasionally we get questions at NCNW about charitable bequests, either to NCNW or to other organizations. What would you care to comment about using trust to make charitable contributions, or the relationship between charitable contributions and the estate plan?
Actually, I apologize that I didn't bring that up, because that's one of the things that I always think about is that, again, when we talk about, I think the poll showed that 30% of the people who are on have an estate plan. Now, many of us give our lives during our lifetime, give charitably. But if indeed we don't take the time to do an estate plan, we cannot give. But there are so many strategic benefits to giving during even after we've passed away. Our assets that are appreciating assets, we can get a tax benefit as we give a tax benefit through our charitable remainder trust. There are so many times that I tell people all the time, we should build into, because I want people to have income producing a trust. So let's make sure that we want to sort of balance that with having charitable giving. So that's an annual gift as opposed to just this one-time thing. But if we can say that, okay, we're going to have our income producing property, let's make sure that we want to defer some of our taxes by making sure that we give to the National Council of Negro Women because of all the great work they have done. We want to give to our churches for that we have had the benefit. And our HBCUs, I truly believe that if 100% of us did estate plans thoughtfully, we would have our community organizations would want for nothing.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions, Mr. Johannes, or are we just about out?
that concludes our question portion, and you can take back over.
All right, thank you very much. I want to thank both of our speakers. You were just fantastic. I knew you would be after I read about you and was introduced to the work that you've already done. I knew we had women who not only know the subject area, but have demonstrated their concern for our community and how we can maximize the resources that we do have. So please accept our gratitude from the bottom of my heart. And also on behalf of NCNW and our national president, Dr. Thelma Thomas Daly, who is our 8th national president and chair. I would invite everybody to mark their calendar for December 1st through the 4th. We'll be celebrating our 60th national convention. Now, we've been in business 87 years, but we don't have convention every year. So this is our 60th convention in our 87th year. I would encourage you, if you've not done so already, to visit NCNW on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and follow, like, and share the material that you see there. We basically have a webinar every Thursday night on some topic or another. Check your email. If you're a member of NCNW, you should get email saying it. And I want to say again, we are lawyers, but we are not advisors. We cannot give you legal or financial advice. Please, please, please make an appointment to get with your attorney, your financial advisor, your accountant, your insurance planner to make sure that you have your bases covered. We're grateful for your presence tonight. This was recorded, and if you want to go back and listen to it again, in about a week or so, it'll be available at NCNW YouTube channel, which is full of lots of great information. Our mission at NCNW is to lead, advocate for, and empower women of African descent, their families, and communities. Tonight is an example of what we do when we're trying to empower each other. Ms. Ross, any final comments before we sign off? Please do take advantage of this time.
Well, I can't thank you enough for, allowing me to participate in what I call my passion for my people in this particular issue. I think that it helps us over, this sort of intentional planning for our futures, for our heirs, and for generations yet unborn is the way that we create greater self-reliance. And where we won't ever probably get rid of the wealth gap in our lifetime, we can certainly work on shrinking it to the point where it, it doesn't matter what the rest of the world thinks, as long as you yourself have a plan for your family and your heirs. If each of us takes that responsibility upon ourselves, we can see and make a difference in how this wealth gap is impacting our communities. It prevents us from building cohesive communities, building and cohesive families, and leaving our families prepared for when we are no longer there to be the head breadwinner. So I want to thank you again for this. And the star of the show, Amy, has left us with such a wealth of information. Her organization is full of people just like her, and it's a rare thing to see, Black people who are collectively pulling together resources to help our families plan for our futures. And I thank her for being such a visionary for establishing APAB. And please take advantage of it. I know that there will be more information so that you can tap into the actual practitioners that are available through APAB. But she has just left us with a wealth of knowledge. She should be applauded because she is doing the work that is needed to close these gaps and to make sure that maybe the next generation isn't having this conversation, right? Because that's what we get into, this hamster wheel of constantly repeating the same. Again, like I mentioned, we are still in the same housing disparity that we were when the Fair Housing Act was passed. And I'm sure the numbers are similar in other areas, because there are systemic biases, prejudices, whether it be your your credit score or whatever the case may be, the how your house is valued, your property is valued. Those things are real. But those are not things that we can't overcome by the intentionality of preparing for our future. So I'll turn it over to Amy for any last words she may have.
So one of the things that I think about, first and foremost, is thank you for NCNW for the work that you do. I appreciate and honor and respect, and I've been forever, once I moved to DC, actually, I have been so enthralled by the NCNW and just the icon, the institution, just the consistency that you provide for the community. So I thank you for being here and being you.
Yes.
There we go.
Thank you.
So, and I'm honored and privileged to be a part of your panel today, because it is, again, great work. It's work that I live for. And I think about, that we talk about the racial wealth gap, and we know that power concedes nothing without a demand. And we know that institutional racism is real. And we know that economic empowerment is not going to be given up quickly, right? So we can do what we can do, as we join forces, as we build our own individual capacities and build other capacities of our next generations, we know that we are stronger. And so our economic reality of that our assets are less, but not because we have greater debt, but as Kimberly said, but our assets less. Let's take the steps to build up those assets. Let's take those steps to pass on our our wealth. Our families have purchased properties, and so we have to take the responsibility to make sure it doesn't end up air property that's lost. Let's do the things that we can do, because so often it's just by not doing anything that we end up lost. Right? So we have to take the strategic steps necessary to move us from the victims to victors. So again, I thank you for the opportunity. I am always excited about seeing the great work that you're doing. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Amy. And you had several people wanted to know how to reach you. Please feel free to share that information with them now.
So again, our website is yourestateplanningattorney.com. relatively simple, but yourestateplanningattorney.com. And if you mention NCNW, you can get a free initial consultation.
Oh,
But you
wow.
have to mention NCNW, because if you don't, it's $450.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you to both of you. It was just a pleasure listening to you. And I would say, I know John Rogers a little bit from Ariel Capital, and I have an account at Ariel Capital, black man who's got an investment firm, slow and steady wins the race. I
That's
think
right.
one of the keys that both of you mentioned was start early and be consistent. Instill saving and investment habits in your kids as they grow up. John tells a story about how his I think it was his grandfather would give him stock for gifts or teach him how to read the financial pages when he was just a boy. And that's how he became the John Rogers that we know and admire. The other thing is his family was part of that group that was run out of Oklahoma. They owned $1 million hotel and had to leave town suddenly because of economic envy and systemic racism. They went to Chicago and reestablished themselves. So we have an elegant legacy, and we need not hold our heads down and feel less than anyone. We have everything that it takes to be successful in our lives, in our careers, and in our legacies as well. I want both you ladies to promise me that you will come back, maybe not next month, but in a few months, come back and we'll take another piece of this and maybe focus in on another aspect of it. I sense that there's a real hunger for this information and a real need for it.
Absolutely. Thank you,
Anything
Janice. It would be my honor.
NCNW wants, I'm glad to be a part of.
God bless you all. Thank you and good night.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night. Bye, everyone.